June 9, 1945. Commander Hydeman of the USS Sea Dog stood on the bridge, watching the dark water around his submarine. His boat had just surfaced in the middle of what the Japanese called their inner sea, waters they believed were absolutely secure, protected by deadly minefields that made passage impossible for enemy vessels. Around him, 8 other American submarines were surfacing in the pre-dawn darkness. 9 submarines, deep inside Japanese home waters, in a sea the Japanese Navy considered their private sanctuary. The journey to get here had been terrifying. For the past 36 hours, Hydeman and his crew had navigated completely submerged through the Tsushima Strait, a narrow passage between Korea and Japan that the Japanese had turned into a death trap. Thousands of moored contact mines floated in the water at various depths, cables tethering them to the seafloor, waiting for a submarine to brush against them and trigger a catastrophic explosion. But the Sea Dog hadn't hit a single mine. Neither had any of the other 8 submarines. They'd navigated through the impenetrable, a minefield using technology the Japanese didn't know existed, FM sonar, a silent detection system that could sieve mines underwater without the telltale ping that would alert enemy forces. As the sun began to rise over the Sea of Japan, Hydeman gave an order that would send shockwaves through Japanese Naval Command: all boats, commence hunting operations. Show them that nowhere is safe anymore. What followed was one of the most devastating submarine operations of World War II, and one of the least known. In just 9 days, Operation Barney would sink 28 Japanese ships and destroy Japan's confidence that any of their waters remained secure. This is the story of how experimental sonar technology, desperate courage, and a desire for revenge combined to break Japan's last naval sanctuary. To understand Operation Barney, we need to understand what the Sea of Japan meant to the Japanese war effort by 1945. By June 1945, Japan was strangling. American submarines had devastated Japanese merchant shipping throughout the Pacific. The famous, unrestricted submarine warfare campaign that Admiral Lockwood had prosecuted since 1943 had sunk over 1,300 Japanese merchant vessels. Japan's oil imports had dropped 90%. Food shipments from Korea and Manchuria were severely disrupted. The island nation was being starved. But there was one exception: the Sea of Japan. This body of water, roughly 600 miles long and 400 miles wide, sits between Japan's western coast and the Asian mainland, Korea to the west, Russia to the north, and Japan's main island of Honshu to the east. For centuries, it had been Japan's protected inner sea, a safe corridor for coastal shipping and trade with the Asian mainland. During World War II, the Japanese military turned the Sea of Japan into what they believed was an impenetrable fortress. The only practical entrance for submarines was the Tsushima Strait, a narrow passage between Korea and the Japanese island of Kyushu. And the Japanese had filled this strait with one of the most extensive minefields ever created. The numbers were staggering. Between 1943 and 1945, the Japanese Navy laid approximately 55,000 moored contact mines in the Tsushima Strait. These weren't simple mines, they were sophisticated weapons placed at multiple depths, creating a 3-dimensional death trap. Some mines were moored just 20 feet below the surface, to catch submarines running at periscope depth. Others were positioned at 40, 60, or 80 feet to catch deeper boats. Some were placed near the seafloor to destroy submarines attempting to sneak through along the bottom. The minefield was about 100 miles long and varied from 15 to 50 miles wide. It was, by any measure, the most heavily mined waterway in the world. And it worked. Multiple submarines had attempted to penetrate the Tsushima Strait. None had made it through. The most famous loss was USS Wahoo, one of the most successful submarines in the Pacific Fleet. In October 1943, under Commander Dudley the Mush Morton, a legendary submarine skipper, Wahoo had attempted to exit the Sea of Japan through the La Perouse Strait between Japan and Soviet Sakhalin Island. She was detected, attacked by Japanese aircraft, and sunk with all hands. 80 men died, including Morton, one of the most celebrated submarine commanders of the war. The loss of Wahoo devastated American submarine forces. Morton had been a hero, a man who'd sunk more Japanese tonnage than almost any other skipper. And the Sea of Japan had killed him. After Wahoo, Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of the Pacific Submarine Force, declared the Sea of Japan off-limits. The risk was too great. The minefields were too extensive. American submarines would focus on the open Pacific, where they could operate with reasonable safety. For over a year and a half, the Sea of Japan remained Japan's sanctuary. Merchant ships traveled freely between Japanese ports and Korea. Iron ore from Korea, coal from Manchuria, food from Japanese coastal farms, all moved through the Sea of Japan without threat of submarine attack. Japanese naval commanders called it the Inner Lake. American submariners called it the Emperor's Bathtub. Either way, it represented a humiliating gap in American submarine dominance. Admiral Lockwood never forgot about Wahoo. And he never stopped looking for a way to get revenge. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a civilian scientist named Carl Busignies. In 1944, Busignies was working for the Federal Telephone and Radio Corporation, developing advanced sonar systems. Traditional sonar, which submarines had been using since World War I, worked by sending out a loud acoustic ping and listening for echoes. When the ping hit an object, it bounced back, allowing the operator to calculate range and bearing. The problem with traditional sonar was that it was incredibly loud. Every ship, submarine, and listening post within miles could hear the ping. Using active sonar was like walking through a dark forest with a spotlight. Yes, you could see obstacles, but everyone could see you. This made traditional sonar almost useless for mine detection. If a submarine used active sonar to search for mines, every Japanese patrol craft and shore station would immediately know a submarine was in the area. The sub would be hunted down and destroyed long before it could navigate through a minefield. Busignies had an idea: what if you could make sonar silent? His solution was frequency-modulated sonar, or FM sonar. Instead of sending out a single loud ping at one frequency, FM sonar sent out a rapid series of pulses at varying frequencies, sweeping through different sound wavelengths in quick succession. The pulses were much quieter than traditional sonar, and the varying frequencies made them much harder for enemy hydrophones to detect. More importantly, FM sonar could detect much smaller objects with greater precision. Traditional sonar was designed to detect large targets like ships. FM sonar could detect something as small as a naval mine, and could distinguish between a mine and other underwater objects like rocks or debris. By late 1944, Busignies had working prototypes. The Navy was interested but skeptical. The technology was experimental, unproven in combat conditions. There were questions about reliability, about whether FM sonar could work in real-world conditions with water temperature variations, different salinity levels, and acoustic clutter from ocean currents. Admiral Lockwood, however, saw potential. And he saw an opportunity. In January 1945, Lockwood proposed a radical operation: use FM sonar-equipped submarines to penetrate the Tsushima Strait, enter the Sea of Japan, and conduct unrestricted warfare against Japanese shipping in waters the Japanese considered absolutely safe. The proposal was audacious, some said suicidal. You'd be asking submarine crews to navigate submerged through 100 miles of dense minefields, in narrow straits with strong currents, using experimental technology that had never been tested in combat. If the FM sonar failed, if it couldn't detect the mines, or detected them too late, submarines would hit mines and be destroyed instantly. There would be no survivors, no rescue attempts. The crews would simply disappear. Pacific Fleet Command initially rejected the plan. Too risky. Too experimental. The potential losses were unacceptable. But Lockwood persisted. He argued that by June 1945, with the war clearly winding down, this might be the last chance to get revenge for Wahoo. More practically, he argued that penetrating the Sea of Japan would have enormous strategic and psychological impact. It would cut Japan's last reliable supply line from the Asian mainland. And it would shatter Japanese confidence that they had any safe waters remaining. After months of debate, Pacific Fleet Command gave conditional approval. Lockwood could proceed, but with strict limitations. He could use no more than 9 submarines. They would be volunteers only, no commander would be ordered on this mission. And if the first submarine through reported that FM sonar wasn't working, the entire operation would be scrubbed immediately. Lockwood began recruiting. The call for volunteers went out to submarine squadron commanders in April 1945. Lockwood was looking for experienced boats with exceptional crews. This wasn't a mission for rookies. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Nearly every submarine commander in the Pacific Fleet volunteered. They all knew about Wahoo. They all wanted revenge. And they all wanted to be part of what could be the most daring submarine operation of the war. Lockwood selected 9 submarines, all Balao or Gato-class fleet boats with proven combat records. The submarines chosen were USS Sea Dog, Commander Earl Hydeman, overall mission commander, USS Crevalle, USS Spadefish, USS Tenosa, USS Bonefish, USS Flying Fish, USS Bowfin, USS Tunny, and USS Skate. These were veteran boats. The Bowfin alone had completed 8 war patrols and sunk 44 Japanese ships. The Spadefish had sunk the Japanese carrier Shinano, the largest aircraft carrier ever built, just 6 months earlier. These were elite submarines with elite crews. In May 1945, all 9 boats were retrofitted with FM sonar systems. The equipment was installed in the tightest secrecy at Pearl Harbor and Guam. Crews were trained on the new sonar, but they weren't told what the mission would be. Operational security was absolute. If word leaked that American submarines were planning to penetrate the Sea of Japan, the Japanese would reinforce the minefields and station additional patrol craft in the Tsushima Strait. On June 4, 1945, the 9 submarine commanders were finally briefed on Operation Barney. The briefing was held in Admiral Lockwood's office at Pearl Harbor. He laid out charts of the Tsushima Strait showing the estimated minefield locations, compiled from intelligence reports, captured Japanese documents, and observations from previous, failed, penetration attempts. The plan was straightforward but terrifying. The submarines would approach the Tsushima Strait in 3 groups of 3 boats each, separated by several hours. They would enter the strait at night, then submerge completely before reaching the minefield. Running fully submerged at slow speed, about 3 to 4 knots, they would navigate through the minefields using FM sonar to detect and avoid mines. The passage would take approximately 10 to 12 hours of continuous submerged running through mine-infested waters. Once through the strait and inside the Sea of Japan, the submarines would spread out and conduct independent hunting operations for 8 to 9 days. Then they would rendezvous and exit through the same route, again running the gauntlet of mines on the way out. Commander Hydeman of the Sea Dog, designated as mission commander, asked the question everyone was thinking, "Admiral, what if the FM sonar doesn't work? What if we can't detect the mines?" Lockwood's response was blunt, "Then you'll hit a mine and die instantly. You won't know the sonar failed until it's too late. That's the risk. That's why I'm only accepting volunteers." He paused, then added, "Gentlemen, Wahoo and her crew deserve justice. The Japanese think they're safe in their inner sea. I want to prove them wrong. I want them to understand that nowhere is safe anymore, that we can reach them anywhere. This mission will break their spirit. But I won't order you to do it. This has to be your choice." Every commander volunteered without hesitation. June 4, 1945. The 9 submarines departed from Guam in 3 groups. The first group, Sea Dog, Crevalle, and Spadefish, left first. They would be the pioneers, the ones who would discover whether FM sonar actually worked in combat conditions. The voyage to the Tsushima Strait took 4 days. During that time, the crews conducted final training on the FM sonar systems. The equipment looked deceptively simple, a console with oscilloscope displays showing sonar returns. But interpreting those displays required skill and experience. Sonar operators had to learn to distinguish between mines, rocks, debris, fish schools, and thermal layers that created false returns. The FM sonar was also temperamental. It required careful calibration for water conditions. Temperature and salinity changes affected how sound traveled through water, which meant operators had to constantly adjust the equipment. And the system generated a lot of heat. In the confined space of a submarine, this made operating conditions even more uncomfortable than usual. June 8, 1945. Evening. The first group approached the entrance to the Tsushima Strait. Commander Hydeman on Sea Dog gave the order, dive the boat. Make your depth 150 feet. Rig for silent running. Sonar, activate FM system. The submarine slipped beneath the surface. Inside, red lights illuminated the control room. The crew moved quietly, speaking in whispers. Every man knew that somewhere ahead, in the darkness of the water, thousands of mines waited. In the sonar compartment, sonarman First Class Robert Logue watched his oscilloscope screen. The FM sonar was active, sending out its silent pulses, painting a picture of the underwater environment. And then he saw it. A contact. Small, stationary, suspended in the water about 300 yards ahead. The signature was unmistakable, a moored mine. Contact, mine, dead ahead, 300 yards, depth 40 feet, Logue reported calmly. In the control room, Hydeman felt his heart rate spike. This was it. The moment of truth. The FM sonar had detected a mine. Now they had to see if they could avoid it. Helm, come left 15 degrees. Maintain depth and speed. The Sea Dog turned gently to port, giving the mine a wide berth. The crew waited in tense silence. If the FM sonar was wrong, if the mine was actually closer than indicated, they were about to die. Minutes passed. The mine drifted by on the starboard side, well clear of the hull. The FM sonar worked. For the next 11 hours, the Sea Dog and her sister boats crept through the minefield. It was the most intense experience any of the crews had ever faced. Sonarman Logue would later describe it: imagine driving blindfolded through a parking lot full of bombs, guided only by someone looking at a fuzzy radar screen. That's what it felt like. Every few minutes, we'd detect another mine. Some were exactly where we expected based on the intelligence. Others were in completely random locations. The Japanese had been creative, they'd varied the depths, clustered mines together in some areas, spread them out in others. The worst part was the waiting. We were moving so slowly, maybe 3 knots, that it took forever to actually clear the danger once we detected it. You'd see a mine on the screen, call out the position, wait while the boat adjusted course, then wait some more as we slowly crept past it. Every second felt like an hour. Commander Hydeman's patrol report describes detecting 72 separate mines during the transit through Tsushima Strait. The Crevalle detected 68. The Spadefish detected 91. Think about that for a moment. The Spadefish passed within detection range of 91 naval mines during an 11-hour period. That's more than 8 mines per hour. 1 mine every 7 minutes, on average, for 11 straight hours. And they were navigating this deadly obstacle course completely blind except for the FM sonar. At 150 feet depth, running submerged, there was zero visibility. No periscope observations. No external references. Just the sonar screen and the navigation plot. The crews couldn't surface to verify their position. They couldn't use active sonar for navigation because that would alert Japanese patrol craft. They relied entirely on dead reckoning, estimating their position based on course, speed, and time, combined with the FM sonar readings. If their navigation calculations were off by even a few hundred yards, they might drift into the densest part of the minefield. If the currents pushed them off course, and the Tsushima Strait had notoriously strong and unpredictable currents, they might find themselves in mine clusters they couldn't navigate through. Hour after hour, the submarines crept forward. The air inside got stale, running fully submerged for that long meant the atmospheric system struggled to keep up. Carbon dioxide levels rose. The temperature climbed as the FM sonar equipment generated heat. Men sweated in the darkness, speaking in whispers, acutely aware that death floated all around them just beyond the hull. And then, after 11 hours that felt like 11 days, Sonarman Logue made an announcement that brought relief to every man aboard, sonar contact density decreasing. "Sir, I think we're through the main minefield." Hydeman checked the plot. They'd traveled approximately 110 miles submerged. Based on their calculations, they should be past the Tsushima Strait, inside the Sea of Japan. Take her up to periscope depth. Carefully. The Sea Dog rose slowly. At 60 feet, Hydeman raised the periscope and took a quick look around. Open water. No patrol craft. No mines visible on the surface. They'd made it. Behind them, the Crevalle and Spadefish had also successfully navigated the minefield. All three submarines were now inside the Sea of Japan, the first American submarines to penetrate Japan's inner lake since Wahoo had been sunk 20 months earlier. Over the next 2 days, the other 6 submarines made the same terrifying journey. 8 of the 9 boats successfully penetrated the minefield. 1 didn't make it. USS Bonefish, commanded by Lawrence Edge, was in the third group of submarines entering the Tsushima Strait. On June 18, as she navigated through the minefield, something went wrong. We don't know exactly what happened. Bonefish never emerged from the strait. She vanished with all 85 crew members aboard. Several theories exist. The most likely is that her FM sonar malfunctioned at a critical moment, perhaps due to equipment failure or operator error, and she struck a mine. The explosion would have been catastrophic and instant. At 150 feet depth, the crew would have had no chance of escape. Another theory is that Bonefish was detected by Japanese patrol craft and attacked with depth charges while still in the minefield. Some Japanese records mention detecting and attacking a submarine contact in the Tsushima Strait on June 18, though the records are incomplete. A third, darker possibility is that Bonefish successfully navigated the minefield but was sunk by Japanese forces inside the Sea of Japan before she could join the other submarines. We'll never know for certain. Bonefish simply disappeared. No wreckage was ever found. No survivors ever reported. 85 men vanished into the depths of the Tsushima Strait. When Bonefish failed to arrive at the rendezvous point inside the Sea of Japan, Commander Hydeman knew immediately what had happened. He radioed Pearl Harbor with the grim news: 1 boat lost, presumed sunk with all hands. Admiral Lockwood received the message in his office. He sat quietly for several minutes, then wrote in his war diary, "Bonefish lost. 85 good men gone." This was always the risk. But the mission continues. For Wahoo. For Bonefish. For all the boats we've lost. We'll make the Japanese pay. The remaining 8 submarines spread out across the Sea of Japan and began their hunting operations. What followed was 9 days of unrestricted submarine warfare in waters the Japanese had considered absolutely safe. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was immediate and devastating. Japanese merchant ships in the Sea of Japan had grown complacent. They traveled without escorts. They sailed predictable routes along the coast. They operated on regular schedules. Many didn't even zigzag, the standard defensive maneuver against submarine attack, because they believed there were no submarines to worry about. It was a target-rich environment unlike anything American submarines had experienced in years. Commander Hydeman's Sea Dog sank the first Japanese ship on June 9, just hours after entering the Sea of Japan. It was a freighter carrying iron ore from Korea to Japan, traveling alone, completely unescorted. Sea Dog fired 2 torpedoes from 800 yards. Both hit. The freighter sank in 4 minutes. The Japanese crew probably died without understanding what had happened. How could an American submarine be in the Sea of Japan? It was impossible. The minefields made it impossible. Over the next week, the 8 American submarines rampaged through Japanese shipping lanes. They sank cargo ships, tankers, freighters, coastal steamers, and fishing vessels. They surfaced at night to shell targets with their deck guns, conserving precious torpedoes. They operated with impunity, appearing wherever they wanted, sinking ships at will. The Japanese response was chaotic and ineffective. They dispatched patrol craft and anti-submarine warfare units, but finding submarines in the vast Sea of Japan was nearly impossible, especially when those submarines could submerge and disappear whenever threatened. Japanese forces had grown used to coastal defense and harbor patrol. They weren't prepared for aggressive submarine warfare in open water. Radio intercepts from Japanese shore stations, decoded by American intelligence, revealed the panic. Multiple submarine contacts reported throughout the Sea of Japan. Origins unknown. Patrol forces unable to locate. Merchant losses mounting. Request immediate naval reinforcements. By June 12, just 3 days after the submarines entered, Japanese Imperial Navy headquarters realized what had happened. American submarines had somehow penetrated the Tsushima Strait. The impenetrable minefield had been breached. The safe waters were no longer safe. The psychological impact was devastating. If American submarines could penetrate the Sea of Japan, then nowhere in Japanese-controlled waters was secure. The Navy's promises of protection were worthless. The minefields that had cost enormous resources to lay had failed. Japanese Naval Command immediately ordered additional mines laid in the Tsushima Strait, as if that would help against submarines already inside. They also ordered all merchant traffic in the Sea of Japan suspended until anti-submarine forces could be reinforced. But the damage was done. The myth of the invulnerable inner sea had been shattered. The individual submarine patrols during Operation Barney produced remarkable results. USS Spadefish, commanded by William Germershausen, became the top scorer. In 8 days of operations, Spadefish sank 5 Japanese ships totaling over 12,000 tons. Her most notable kill was the Japanese frigate Hibari, which Spadefish torpedoed and sank on June 13. This was significant because frigates were designed for anti-submarine warfare. Spadefish had hunted and killed the hunter. USS Tenosa, under Richard Latham, sank for ships including 2 large freighters carrying coal from Manchuria. One of these freighters, the Daigo Shinko Maru, was carrying not just coal but also 400 Japanese soldiers being redeployed from Manchuria to defend the home islands. The ship sank in minutes. There were few survivors. USS Flying Fish, commanded by Robert Risser, had one of the more dramatic encounters. On June 11, Flying Fish was running on the surface at night when she encountered a small Japanese convoy, 3 freighters with a single escort. Risser made a surface torpedo attack, sinking 2 of the freighters. The escort immediately counterattacked, forcing Flying Fish to dive. For the next 4 hours, the Japanese escort hunted Flying Fish with depth charges. This was exactly the scenario the American submarines had hoped to avoid, a prolonged depth charge attack while far from any friendly support, deep inside enemy-controlled waters. If Flying Fish were damaged, she'd have no way to escape. The nearest American base was over 1,000 miles away. But Flying Fish's crew remained calm. They went deep, nearly 400 feet, and ran silent. The Japanese escort passed directly overhead multiple times, dropping depth charges that shook the submarine violently. Light bulbs shattered. Cork insulation rained down from the ceiling. But the hull held. And eventually, the Japanese escort, running low on depth charges, gave up and withdrew. Flying Fish survived. And the next night, she was back on the surface, hunting more targets. USS Bowfin, under Alexander Tyree, had perhaps the most psychologically significant patrol. Bowfin operated close to the Japanese coast, in waters so shallow that diving was dangerous. She conducted several bold surface attacks in broad daylight, shelling fishing vessels and small coastal steamers with her deck gun. These attacks were visible from shore. Japanese civilians watched as an American submarine operated freely just miles from the coast, destroying ships in full view of land. For a population that had been told the Navy was protecting them, that the minefields were keeping the Americans out, this was shocking visual proof that the military had failed. One of Bowfin's attacks was witnessed by a Japanese newspaper correspondent who was visiting a coastal town. He filed a dispatch that was published in several newspapers before military censors could stop it. American submarine observed operating within sight of shore. Navy patrol craft unable to respond in time. The enemy has penetrated our inner defenses. No waters are safe. The article caused a minor panic before it was suppressed. But the damage was done. Word spread that American submarines were operating inside the Sea of Japan. Morale plummeted. By June 15, 6 days into Operation Barney, the 8 American submarines had sunk 28 Japanese ships totaling over 70,000 tons. They'd also damaged numerous other vessels that limped back to port. Japanese merchant traffic in the Sea of Japan had essentially ceased. Ships stayed in port. Those that did venture out hugged the coastline, traveling only in daylight, with maximum escort protection. The Sea of Japan, which had been Japan's most active shipping corridor, had become a ghost sea. The economic impact was immediate. Iron ore shipments from Korea stopped. Coal from Manchuria stopped. Food shipments from the Asian mainland dwindled. And most importantly, from Admiral Lockwood's perspective, the Japanese Navy's confidence had been broken. They'd lost their safe haven. They'd lost their inner sanctuary. Wahoo had been avenged. On June 20, the 8 submarines received orders to withdraw. It was time to leave the Sea of Japan before Japanese forces could organize an effective response. The plan was to exit the same way they'd entered, through the Tsushima Strait, running submerged through the minefield, guided by FM sonar. But there was a new complication: the Japanese had reinforced the minefield. Intelligence reports indicated they'd laid additional mines in the areas where they suspected the American submarines had entered. The route out would be even more dangerous than the route in. The submarines made their exit attempts over 2 nights, again in 3 groups to spread out the risk. The first group, Sea Dog, Crevalle, and Spadefish, went first, on the night of June 20-21 ST. This transit was even more tense than the entry. The submarines were exiting through a minefield that was now denser and less predictable. Japanese forces were on high alert, with patrol craft actively searching the strait. And the submarines were low on battery power after days of operations. They had less margin for error if something went wrong. Commander Heidman's patrol report describes detecting 103 mines during the exit transit, even more than during entry. At one point, Sea Dog found herself in what appeared to be a newly laid mine cluster. The FM sonar was painting contacts in every direction. Heidman had to carefully plot a winding path through the mines, sometimes passing within 50 yards of multiple mines simultaneously. It was like threading a needle, his executive officer later said. Except the needle was surrounded by bombs, and we were doing it blind, underwater, hoping our experimental sonar was accurate. But the FM sonar continued to work flawlessly. All 3 submarines in the first group successfully exited the Tsushima Strait and reached open water. The second and third groups followed over the next 2 nights. One by one, the submarines emerged from the Sea of Japan, navigated through the minefield, and escaped into the Pacific. All 8 remaining submarines made it out safely. By June 24, 1945, Operation Barney was complete. 8 submarines had penetrated the impenetrable minefield, rampaged through the Sea of Japan for 9 days, sunk 28 Japanese ships, and successfully escaped. The cost: a USS Bonefish and 85 men. The results: devastating material damage, crippled Japanese merchant shipping in their home waters, and shattered Japanese naval confidence. But perhaps most importantly, revenge for Wahoo. Admiral Lockwood had promised that mission would be avenged. Operation Barney fulfilled that promise. The immediate aftermath of Operation Barney was classified at the highest levels. The U.S. Navy didn't want the Japanese to know exactly how American submarines had penetrated the minefield. If Japan understood it was FM sonar that had allowed the penetration, they might develop countermeasures or share that intelligence with other nations. So for months, the operation remained secret. The crews of the 8 submarines were forbidden from discussing their mission with anyone. The losses they'd inflicted on Japanese shipping were attributed to unknown causes or possible mines. It wasn't until after Japan's surrender in August 1945 that the details of Operation Barney began to emerge. The captured Japanese naval records from June 1945 tell a story of confusion, panic, and broken confidence. A report from the Japanese Combined Fleet Headquarters dated June 14, 1945 states, enemy submarine penetration of the Sea of Japan represents catastrophic intelligence failure. Tsushima minefield defenses have proven inadequate. Recommend immediate suspension of all merchant operations in inner waters pending anti-submarine capability restoration. Morale impact on civilian population severe. Another report, from the Japanese Transport Ministry, calculated that Operation Barney had directly cost Japan approximately 70,000 tons of merchant shipping, but the indirect costs were far higher. With merchant traffic suspended or severely curtailed in the Sea of Japan for weeks afterward, the economic damage was in the hundreds of thousands of tons of delayed or cancelled shipments. Iron ore supplies to Japanese steel mills were disrupted. Coal shipments slowed. Food imports from Korea and Manchuria decreased dramatically. All of this contributed to Japan's economic collapse in the final months of the war. But the psychological impact may have been even more significant. Operation Barney proved that Japan's defensive perimeter had completely collapsed. American submarines could operate anywhere, even in waters the Japanese had considered absolutely secure. This contributed to the growing sense of hopelessness that pervaded Japanese military planning in summer 1945. For the submarine crews who participated in Operation Barney, the mission became a defining moment of their service. Commander Earl Hydeman, mission commander aboard Sea Dog, was awarded the Navy Cross for his leadership. In his award citation, Admiral Lockwood wrote, "Commander Hydeman displayed extraordinary courage and professional skill in leading the first American submarine force to successfully penetrate the Sea of Japan since 1943. His confident leadership and tactical acumen were instrumental in the mission's success and directly contributed to the destruction of critical enemy shipping." But Hydeman himself always deflected credit to his sonar operators and crew. In his post-war memoir, he wrote, "Operation Barney succeeded because of three things: experimental technology that worked better than anyone expected, submarine crews who kept their nerve during hours of terrifying minefield transit, and sheer good fortune. We were lucky. Bonefish wasn't. I never forgot that we succeeded while 85 men on Bonefish died attempting the same mission. That's not something to celebrate, it's something to remember with humility." Sonarman First Class Robert Logue, whose FM sonar detections had guided Sea Dog through the minefields, received the Silver Star. When asked years later what it felt like to navigate through the minefield, he said, "Honestly, it was the most scared I've ever been. Every time a new mine appeared on the screen, my heart would stop. I kept thinking, what if I miss one? What if the equipment fails? What if my readings are wrong?" It wasn't until we safely reached the Pacific that I finally exhaled. And then, 2 days later, I learned Bonefish hadn't made it, and I felt guilty for surviving. Why did our sonar work and theirs didn't? Or did theirs work, and they just got unlucky? I'll never know. The FM sonar technology that had made Operation Barney possible continued to be developed and refined after the war. Modern submarine sonar systems are direct descendants of Carl Busignies' FM sonar design. The principles he pioneered, using frequency modulation to create quieter, more precise sonar returns, are still used today in advanced naval sonar systems. The loss of USS Bonefish remained a mystery for decades. The submarine simply vanished, and without survivors or wreckage, the exact cause of her sinking couldn't be determined. In 2003, a joint US-Japanese research expedition located what is believed to be Bonefish wreckage in the Tsushima Strait. The wreck lies in approximately 200 feet of water, badly damaged but identifiable by her dimensions and location. Survey of the wreck suggests she struck a mine. There's catastrophic damage to the forward section consistent with a mine explosion. But the survey couldn't determine whether the mine was struck due to FM sonar failure, operator error, equipment malfunction, or simply bad luck. At those depths, in those conditions, with mines densely packed, even perfectly functioning sonar might not provide enough warning to avoid every threat. The wreck site is now considered a war grave, protected under international maritime law. The 85 men of USS Bonefish remain with their boat, in the waters where they gave their lives attempting one of the most daring submarine missions of World War II. A memorial plaque at the Submarine Force Museum in Groton, Connecticut, honors Bonefish and her crew. It reads, USS Bonefish, SS-223. Lost in action, June 18, 1945, while penetrating the Tsushima Strait during Operation Barney. 85 crew members. Their courage opened the Sea of Japan to American submarines. Their sacrifice will not be forgotten. Admiral Charles Lockwood considered Operation Barney one of the crowning achievements of his submarine force. In his post-war history of submarine operations, he wrote extensively about the mission. Operation Barney accomplished multiple objectives simultaneously, he wrote. Materially, it destroyed vital Japanese shipping and disrupted their home island supply lines at a critical time. Strategically, it eliminated Japan's last safe haven for merchant traffic. But psychologically, it delivered the message that American reach was absolute. Nowhere was safe. The minefields couldn't stop us. The geography couldn't protect them. We could strike anywhere, anytime. That psychological blow, the destruction of hope that any sanctuary remained, may have been more valuable than all the ships we sank. Lockwood also reflected on the personal significance of the mission. When we lost Wahoo in October 1943, I made a promise to Mush, Morton and his crew that we would return to the Sea of Japan. That we would prove their sacrifice meant something. Operation Barney fulfilled that promise. We went back. We succeeded where Wahoo had failed, not because we were braver or better, but because we had technology Wahoo didn't have. The FM sonar made the difference. But the courage was the same. And I hope somewhere, somehow, Mush, Morton and the 79 men who died with him on Wahoo knew that we came back. That we avenged them. The emotional weight of Wahoo's loss had hung over the submarine force for 20 months. Morton had been more than just a successful commander, he'd been a symbol, a legend, a man whose aggressive tactics and fearless leadership inspired an entire generation of submarine officers. His loss had devastated morale. Operation Barney's success provided closure. The submarine force had returned to the Sea of Japan. They'd done what Morton had attempted. They'd proven that Japan's inner sea wasn't invulnerable. And they'd come home. For the men who served on submarines in the Pacific, Operation Barney represented vindication. They developed tactics, technology, and courage that could overcome any obstacle. Even impenetrable minefields couldn't stop them. The broader strategic impact of Operation Barney is harder to quantify but no less significant. By June 1945, Japan was already on the verge of collapse. The firebombing campaign had devastated Japanese cities. The naval blockade had strangled Japanese industry. The loss of Okinawa in late June provided the US with bases just 350 miles from the Japanese home islands. Invasion planning was well underway. In this context, Operation Barney's material contribution, 28 ships sunk, was relatively modest. The strategic bombing campaign and the submarine blockade of Japan's Pacific trade routes had already done the heavy lifting of economic strangulation. But Operation Barney's timing made it psychologically significant. Coming in June 1945, as Japan faced potential invasion, the penetration of the Sea of Japan reinforced the message that resistance was hopeless. Every defensive layer had been breached. Every sanctuary had been violated. American power could reach anywhere. Some historians argue that missions like Operation Barney contributed to the Japanese decision to surrender after the atomic bombings in August. The accumulated weight of defeats, military, naval, economic, and psychological, made continuing the war seem pointless. If American submarines could penetrate the Sea of Japan, if B-29s could incinerate cities at will, if the Navy could shell coastal targets with impunity, what hope remained? Other historians are more skeptical, arguing that the atomic bombs and Soviet entry into the war were the decisive factors, and that operations like Barney, while impressive, were peripheral to the ultimate surrender decision. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Operation Barney didn't single-handedly end the war. But it was one more demonstration of American technological and operational superiority. One more nail in the coffin of Japanese resistance. One more reason for Japanese leaders to conclude that further fighting was futile. The technology developed for Operation Barney had a legacy far beyond World War II. FM sonar became the foundation for modern submarine detection systems. The principles Carl Busignies pioneered, frequency modulation, signal processing, silent detection, evolved into the sophisticated sonar suites that modern submarines carry today. During the Cold War, American and Soviet submarines engaged in a decades-long technological competition in sonar development. The Americans generally maintained an advantage in sonar technology, partly because of the early lead established by innovations like FM sonar. The ability to detect targets silently, at long ranges, with high precision became critical in submarine warfare. Modern submarine sonar can detect targets at ranges measured in tens of miles. It can classify targets, distinguishing between submarines, surface ships, whales, and other underwater sounds. It can operate in multiple modes, active and passive, high and low frequency. And it can do all this while remaining extremely difficult to detect. None of this would have been possible without the foundational work done in the 1940s on systems like FM sonar. Carl Busignies, the civilian scientist who developed FM sonar, continued working on advanced electronics and signal processing after the war. He became a pioneer in early computer development and served as a senior executive at ITT Corporation. When he died in 1986, his obituary mentioned his work on FM sonar, but most people outside the submarine community had forgotten how significant his contribution had been. In 2005, the Navy named a research laboratory at the Naval Undersea Warfare Center after Busignies, recognizing his contributions to submarine technology. The Busignies Sonar Research Laboratory continues to develop advanced detection systems for submarines. For the men who served on the 8 submarines that successfully completed Operation Barney, the mission became a badge of honor that they carried for the rest of their lives. Submarine veterans' reunions would always include Barney survivors, who would gather to share stories, remember fallen comrades, and reflect on the mission that had taken them through the most dangerous waters of the war. Commander William Germershausen of USS Spadefish, the top-scoring boat during Operation Barney, continued in the Navy after the war and eventually reached the rank of Vice Admiral. He commanded submarine squadrons during the Cold War and helped develop tactics for operating submarines in Soviet-controlled waters, drawing on lessons learned from penetrating the Sea of Japan. In his retirement, Germershausen gave occasional lectures at the Naval War College about Operation Barney. One of his favorite points was about the importance of taking calculated risks. We knew penetrating the Tsushima Strait was dangerous. We knew bonefish might not be the only loss. But we also knew that playing it safe, staying out of the Sea of Japan, meant letting the Japanese maintain a sanctuary. Sometimes you have to accept risk to achieve objectives. The key is making sure the risk is proportional to the potential gain. Operation Barney was risky. But the gain, both material and psychological, justified that risk. He would always end his lectures by talking about bonefish. 85 men didn't come home from that mission. We can't forget them. They took the same risk we did. We were lucky. They weren't. That's the nature of combat. Luck plays a role alongside skill and courage. We succeeded and they died, not because we were better submariners, but because we were fortunate. That should inspire humility, not pride. In 1995, on the 50th anniversary of Operation Barney, the Navy held a commemoration ceremony at Pearl Harbor. Several surviving veterans of the mission attended, now in their 70s and 80s. The ceremony included the unveiling of a memorial plaque honoring all 9 submarines that participated in Operation Barney, with special emphasis on USS Bonefish and her lost crew. The plaque was installed at the submarine base, near the memorial for USS Wahoo. Placing the 2 memorials near each other was deliberate, linking the loss that inspired Operation Barney with the mission that avenged it. Admiral Hank McKinney, who had served as a junior officer on USS Tunney during Operation Barney and was now retired, gave a speech at the ceremony. 50 years ago, we did something that seemed impossible. We navigated through minefields that had killed other submarines. We operated in waters the enemy considered absolutely secure. We sank their ships and shattered their confidence. And most of us came home. But today isn't about celebrating our achievement. It's about remembering the cost. Operation Barney succeeded, but it cost 85 lives. Bonefish's crew paid the ultimate price so that we could complete the mission. And before Operation Barney, Wahoo paid the price that inspired the mission in the first place. So when we remember Operation Barney, we should remember it as a story of sacrifice, courage, and technological innovation, but most of all, sacrifice. The Sea of Japan was opened not just by FM sonar or submarine tactics. It was opened by the willingness of men like those on Bonefish to risk everything. That's what we should remember. That's what we should honor. After the speech, a Navy honor guard conducted a wreath-laying ceremony. Wreaths were placed in the water in memory of both USS Wahoo and USS Bonefish, the submarine that inspired Operation Barney and the submarine that was lost completing it. As the ceremony concluded, the surviving Operation Barney veterans gathered for photographs. The images from that day show elderly men in uniform, their faces lined with age but their bearing still military. Many were visibly emotional. Several were crying. They were remembering not just the mission, but the friends who didn't come home. They were thinking about Bonefish, somewhere at the bottom of the Tsushima Strait. They were thinking about Wahoo, lost in the La Perouse Strait 2 years earlier. They were thinking about all the submarines that had been lost in the Pacific, 52 American submarines and over 3,500 submariners killed during World War II. Operation Barney was remarkable. But it was just one mission in a much larger, bloodier campaign. The submarine war in the Pacific was brutal, with a casualty rate higher than any other branch of the U.S. military. Roughly 1 in 5 submariners who served in combat died. The survivors of Operation Barney knew how lucky they'd been. They'd completed one of the most dangerous missions of the war and lived to tell about it. But they never forgot that their survival was, in part, a matter of chance. In the decades since World War II, Operation Barney has become something of a footnote in popular histories of the Pacific War. Most books focus on the major battles: Midway, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. The submarine campaign gets less attention, and specific missions like Operation Barney are often omitted entirely due to space constraints. This is unfortunate because Operation Barney represents something significant about how wars are actually won. It wasn't a decisive battle with thousands of combatants. It wasn't a dramatic turning point that changed the course of the war. It was a calculated operation using experimental technology to achieve specific strategic objectives, and it worked. Modern military historians who specialize in naval warfare consider Operation Barney one of the most successful submarine operations of World War II, not because of the tonnage sunk, but because of the operational innovation it represented. Dr. Norman Friedman, a leading naval historian, wrote, "Operation Barney demonstrated what happens when you combine technological innovation with tactical daring." FM sonar was experimental. Penetrating the Tsushima Strait was considered impossible. But the Navy tried anyway, accepted the risks, and succeeded. This willingness to innovate and take calculated risks was characteristic of the American submarine force throughout the war. It's why American submarines were so devastatingly effective. Dr. Edward Miller, another respected naval historian, emphasizes the psychological dimension. The material damage from Operation Barney was significant but not overwhelming. The psychological impact was enormous. Japan had built extensive defenses specifically to protect the Sea of Japan. When those defenses failed spectacularly, it reinforced the narrative of American invincibility and Japanese defeat. That psychological warfare component, breaking the enemy's will to resist, is often more valuable than destroying their equipment. There's one more aspect of Operation Barney that deserves attention: the human element of spending hours navigating through a minefield. Modern readers might not fully appreciate what this experience was like for the submarine crews. Imagine being inside a steel tube, 150 feet underwater, moving at walking speed through water filled with thousands of explosives. You can't see anything. Your only information comes from a sonar screen showing fuzzy blips that might be mines, might be debris, might be equipment malfunctions. Every few minutes, a new contact appears. The sonar operator calls it out. The helmsman adjusts course. The boat slowly moves past the threat. And you wait, knowing that if the sonar is wrong, if the mine is closer than indicated, you'll die instantly in a catastrophic explosion. No warning. No chance to escape. Just sudden death. And this goes on for 11 hours. The psychological stress was immense. Lieutenant Robert Bobchinski, engineering officer on USS Crevalle, described it in his post-war memoir, "We'd trained for this. We'd practiced on the FM sonar for weeks. We'd gone through countless simulations. But nothing prepared you for the reality of actually doing it. The first time the sonar operator called out a mine, 200 yards, depth 45 feet, my mouth went completely dry. I remember thinking, this is it. This is how I die. But the boat turned, we passed the mine, and we kept going. Then there was another mine. And another. After a while, you almost became numb to it. Almost. But never completely. There was always that edge of fear, that awareness that the next mine might be the one that kills you. The worst part was knowing we'd have to do it all again on the way out. We spent 9 days in the Sea of Japan knowing that eventually, we'd have to run that gauntlet again. Some guys handled it well. Others didn't. We had one sailor who started having panic attacks, hyperventilating, saying he couldn't go back through the mines. The corpsman had to sedate him. I understood completely. The bravest thing that sailor did was admit his fear. The rest of us were just as scared, we just didn't say it out loud. This psychological dimension, the mental strain of sustained danger, is an aspect of submarine warfare that's often overlooked. Submarine crews had to maintain composure and perform complex tasks while under extreme stress, in confined spaces, for extended periods. The mental toughness required was as important as technical skill. The story of Operation Barney ultimately is a story about several things simultaneously. It's a story about technological innovation, how experimental FM sonar made possible what had been impossible before. It's a story about tactical daring, the willingness to attempt a mission that most considered suicidal. It's a story about strategic impact, how a relatively small operation could have psychological effects far beyond its material results. But most fundamentally, it's a story about people. About Admiral Lockwood's determination to avenge Wahoo. About Carl Busignies' scientific innovation. About Commander Heidman's leadership. About Sonarman Logue's skill. About the 85 men on Bonefish who died trying. About the hundreds of submariners who successfully completed one of the most dangerous missions of the war. Wars are won by technology and tactics and strategy. But they're fought by people, people who face fear and danger and sometimes death to accomplish objectives they believe are important. The men of Operation Barney believed that penetrating the Sea of Japan was important. They believed that avenging Wahoo mattered. They believed that showing the Japanese no sanctuary remained would help end the war. And they were willing to risk their lives for those beliefs. 8 submarines came home. 1 didn't. That ratio, 8 successes to 1 failure, might seem acceptable from a strategic planning perspective. But for the 85 families who lost fathers, sons, brothers, and husbands on Bonefish, the statistics were meaningless. For them, Operation Barney wasn't a triumph. It was a tragedy. This tension between operational success and human cost is central to understanding military history. Missions succeed or fail. Objectives are achieved or not. But behind every operation are individual human beings whose lives are forever changed by what happens. June 9, 1945. 4:47 a.m. The Sea of Japan. Commander Heidman stood on the bridge of USS Sea Dog, watching the sun rise over water the Japanese had considered their private sanctuary. Around him, 8 other American submarines were surfacing after their terrifying journey through the minefield. They'd made it. They were inside. The impossible had been accomplished. But Heidman knew the mission was just beginning. They had 9 days to inflict maximum damage on Japanese shipping before they'd have to make the equally terrifying journey back through the mines to escape. And somewhere behind them, USS Bonefish was missing. Heidman didn't know yet that she'd been lost, but he suspected. Bonefish should have arrived hours ago. So the moment was bittersweet. They'd succeeded in penetrating Japan's inner sea. But the cost was already being counted. Heidman gave the order, all boats, commence hunting operations. The war continued. The mission continued. And the submariners who'd navigated through the impossible would spend the next 9 days proving to Japan that their sanctuary was an illusion. No place was safe. No waters were protected. American reach was absolute. The silent sonar had broken the unbreakable defense. And Japan's last refuge had become another hunting ground. Today, the Tsushima Strait is peaceful international waters. Commercial shipping passes through freely. The 55,000 mines the Japanese laid during World War II have long since been cleared or corroded away. But on the seafloor, in approximately 200 feet of water, lies USS Bonefish, a steel tomb containing 85 American submariners who gave their lives attempting to penetrate Japan's inner sea. The wreck is protected as a war grave. It cannot be disturbed or salvaged. The men of Bonefish remain with their boat, in the water where they died, forever young, forever on patrol. Every year, on June 18, submarine veterans and active duty submariners conduct a memorial ceremony remembering Operation Barney and honoring USS Bonefish. A wreath is placed in the water. Taps is played. And for a few moments, the sacrifice of those 85 men is remembered. The silent sonar that made Operation Barney possible evolved into the sophisticated detection systems modern submarines carry today. Carl Busignies' innovation fundamentally changed submarine warfare. What began as an experimental system for detecting mines became the foundation for decades of sonar development. And Admiral Lockwood's promise to avenge USS Wahoo was fulfilled. The submarine force returned to the Sea of Japan. They proved that no waters were safe from American submarines. They honored Mush Morton and his crew by succeeding where Wahoo had failed. The memorial plaques for USS Wahoo and USS Bonefish stand side by side at the submarine base in Pearl Harbor, linked forever by the operation that connected them. One submarine inspired the mission. One submarine was lost completing it. But both are remembered. Operation Barney demonstrated that with courage, innovation, and calculated risk-taking, even the impossible can be achieved. The Japanese believed the Sea of Japan was their unbreachable sanctuary. 8 American submarines proved them wrong. This is the story of how experimental sonar technology, desperate courage, and a desire for revenge combined to break Japan's last naval defense, and how 85 men on USS Bonefish paid the ultimate price for that victory. The silent sonar broke the unbreakable defense. And the inner sea was never safe again.